Hello. So I'm going to be talking a bit about the sound effector and the new sound effector, but it's also going to kind of go into a kind of deeper dive into some Xpresso stuff. Yesterday I did a presentation and it came up about 20 minutes short, so I added some more stuff. So if it all starts to go weird and dreamlike and rambly and deep at the end, then you'll know why, because I haven't rehearsed it. But so I'm a freelance animation director, motion designer, 3D generalist, whatever you want to call it. And I really like doing kind of visual music and syncing. So well, this is my reel, just to have an idea of what I do. So this is Black Mirror I worked on last year. And some more audio projects, music visualizations. Okay, there's the mandatory reel. So this is an animation I did for Maxon, just to showcase some of the new sound effector abilities. Glenn showed it briefly before, but in case you haven't seen it, this is it. So the idea really is just to isolate each musical element and show it, and the concept, I guess, is just to make it really clear, because quite often you see quite fuzzy kind of EQ waveforms and stuff, and I don't like that, and I'm really interested in trying to make it really explicit relationship between form and audio. That's where my kind of passion is. So, yeah, briefly, I'm going to talk about kind of the bass drum, the pulsing thing that ran through the middle of it, and a lot of it I did in Xpresso rather than using MoGraph normally, and this talk could be kind of using the sound effector without MoGraph in a way, and looking at the EQ spline, and then looking at more Xpresso using the point node, using the iterators, which are kind of, this is where it starts to go a bit deeper, and it's more like doing MoGraph in Xpresso. And then I've just added on some more stuff at the end in case I go way too fast. Okay. So first, I'm just going to do a really quick overview of the new sound effector. So I've got some clones here. I'm just going to drop the sound effector in. And then it wants a sound. So you load up a WAV file or an AIF. And if I just press play, you've got just a very simple kind of EQ. These are your low frequencies, these are your high frequencies. If you put this probe over here, it's just going to pick out the low frequencies. If you put it up here, it's just going to apply them to the clones there. So I'm just going to select it. I'm going to put it over the bass. And then, so one thing I've found as well, oddly, is if you have the EQ in the viewport, it slows it all down a bit, so maybe that's something to tidy up. So that's not that interesting at the moment. It's got a couple of different modes. The peak mode, which just reads out the highest bit of a waveform. The average takes the average of the waveform, but I'm going to put it into step mode and pull it along a little bit. And then this gives us maybe a little bit more kind of what we're expecting to make a basic kind of EQ. Let's do this. So I'm going to scale it up. And then also there's, in most clone effectors, there's a color mode. So I'm going to turn that on. And at the moment, that's just reading the frequency. So the graph is just reading a low frequency to a high frequency. It doesn't do a lot. But if you put it into volume mode, as the volume increases, you'll see the gradients going the other way on the graph. It kind of, as the power increases, you see it being applied to the clones. So let's go back a little bit. And if we go to peak mode, which looks a little bit dull. Where it becomes interesting is if I can duplicate the probes. So now I've got 2 probes. So one's for low end, one's for high end. And it's iterating through each probe at the moment, which isn't exactly, it's a little bit confusing. So if we want to see what's going on better, turn it to distribute. So we've got the bass, and then we've got the hi-hat. And then each of these probes can be in a different mode. So the hi-hats could be in, say, step mode. So it's kind of, it's endlessly kind of tweakable, and you can keep diddling and kind of until you've got exactly what you want. It also goes into blend mode, so it blends the values between the clones. It's kind of got 3 points. But that's just a really quick overview. But it doesn't seem like a huge change from the last sound effector, but just for probes and the visual nature of it, just make it just a lot more fun to use, a lot clearer. Okay, and also you can put a little bit of decay on there just to soften it up. Okay, so that's a quick overview. Then we're going to just look now at this kind of bass object that's going up and down the middle, and I'm just going to show you how I did that and why I used Xpresso. So if we have a look, this is probably, where are we? This is probably how you'd expect it to be done. So we're just highlighting the bass up there, we're just scaling it up, and it's just a little bit of decay, and it's got color mode on, which is all good kind of thing, but I didn't do it like that because I just like to be difficult, but by using Xpresso, you can link it into far more things, and I'll try and show you why and how I did it, hopefully. So if you don't know what Xpresso is, it's literally just about, let me just move that across. It's literally just about creating relationships, of just linking one thing to another. So I'm just going to put an Xpresso tag down and just move it up. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to link this null to the radius of this platonic. So I'm going to drop the platonic in, I'm going to drop the null in, and then I want the radius of a platonic, so I drop it on the input side. And I want, say, the Z position. I'm going to drop it onto the output side. And I just drag it across. And now when I move this, it's linked. And so it's all about relationships. And you can create pretty well any field in Cinema 4D you can link. The thing about MoGraph is you're kind of limited. The number of things you can do is kind of fixed. But with Xpresso, you can link almost anything. And that's why I use it. And then you can put, say, if I put a math node in there, I'll link it. So I could multiply or divide the two sums. So I could put, say, math node and then divide by 4. So now when I move my null, it scales up at 1/4 of the scale it would already. So you can start to build all sorts of kind of automated relationships. And again, this is a slightly more complex one. If I just put together to show you. So I'm feeding in the time, so that's just a number that will increase. And then the time will just pull this null across, so it's just feeding into Z position. And then the null just feeds into a trigonometric node, which is literally a sine function. So you put in an increasing set of numbers, and you get a sine wave out. So that's going into my radius. I drop an absolute node down here just to make sure it's always a positive value. So instead of -1, it just stays above 0, because a minus number in a radius won't work. And that's it. And it's kind of, when you first look at Xpresso, you kind of go, well, how do you know about all these nodes, and how does it work and stuff? But literally, just go through the manual, go through Cineversity, and it doesn't take that long just to kind of, just to learn. And it's a little bit dry, but it's worth it. Read the manual is that tip. So where are we? So this is something I did just on a plane on the way over. I just took this example kind of thing, and then I just started linking up. So it's no keyframes at all. And everything's just linked to everything else. So it's just, you're just affecting scale, you're just affecting radius, you're just pulling everything in. And it makes it really nice, because you could just then change the speed of one thing, and the whole system would be affected. And it's kind of like creating a big kind of working clock. And it's just a fun thing to do. So this is the setup for that. And it looks super complex, but it isn't. You're just adding things. You're just pushing the time into things. You're multiplying things. And once you get used to it, it is actually a really creative way of working. And then you don't just have to work in Xpresso. You can just link it to MoGraph. You can link it to all your parametric effects and extruders and everything else. And it just really helps you get to a slightly lower level of a program, which helps you do kind of more powerful things. But let's go back to the bass. It's all about the bass. So this is how, so let me get my UI sorted out. So this is how you do the bass in Xpresso. So I want a sound effector. In fact, what I might do is I'll just grab the sound effector from there and turn it on and check it's working. Yep. So I've got my sound effector and I've got my sphere. That's pretty much all I need. I'll just put an Xpresso tag on there. And then I want my sphere. And I want to affect the radius, so drop it in there. I want my sound effector. And to read a sound effector, there's some, just down here, there's some motion graphic nodes. I'll just pull this up a little bit. And I just want the sample node, and that will just basically read an effector. So I'm just going to plug my effector into my sample node, and then I'm just going to pull out the strength, i.e. how much it's affecting anything, stick it into a radius. Now, that is working, but my sphere is absolutely tiny. So what I could do is I could just put a multiply node in there, which would be one way of solving it. But a slightly more powerful node, or a much more powerful node, is the range mapper. And you'll use this all the time if you use Xpresso. It just takes one set of values and transfers them to another. So you could kind of, I'll show you. So you've got kind of your input, which is 0 to 1 at the moment, and then I could make that output to, say, 15 to 100. Oh. So the smallest size it would go would be 15, and the largest is 100. So it's reading the delay from the effector, but I'll show you. So that's basically it. Now I am running through Xpresso, doing much the same thing as you would do through MoGraph. I just put a delay effector underneath, and then you can use effectors in point mode, so I just turn that on, and that can create a little bit of delay, which is quite nice. I can also, some kind of alarm. I can also affect the color, or I can affect anything, but I'll show you the color. So I've got my sphere, put my display color on there. So color is a vector, which means it's got 3 digits. And the output from the sample effector is just a real or a float, so it's only got 1 digit. So I just need to convert it. And so real to vector. So I'll just plug, actually, my vector in here. So now I've just got a vector, which is RGB, or XYZ. So just to show you, so X is my red, so now it's red. And then I could make it white by putting them all up. So I'm just controlling color just with numbers. So let's just plug my strength into the red, and I'll make these 0. And now I'm controlling the color of Xpresso, and I can do what I want. I can create any mathematical relationship or any relationship I want within Xpresso. For example, create another mathematical thing. I will affect the blue channel, so I'll go to subtract maybe, and then I'll take 1 minus the strength of this, put it into the blue channel, so it'll be blue when it's small. So, I mean, that's quite cool and quite interesting, but it's actually a more difficult way to do something you could do in MoGraph. But where it kind of gets interesting is, say, if I put a light in here, and I want to actually control the light as well. And it's really easy. You can see where I'm going to go. It's just put the light in, grab the intensity, and I'll probably want a range mapper as well. And so let's make this 0.4 to, say, 2. And then I'm just going to link it up. So now, as the bass kicks, the light gets brighter, which would be quite a difficult thing to do in MoGraph. And as I say, you can link it to anything, as I keep saying. So this is really useful, because when I actually did the animation, I'll just mute that. I linked the lights come on at the top, but they're actually linked to the lens flares, and they actually control the number of particles just popping out here. So it's kind of, it's useful because it helps me just feed into other things. Let's have a look. So let's take that down. Another thing you'll notice as well with the bass is it's kind of going up, down, 1, 2, 3, 4, up, and then down, 2, 3, 4, down, 2, 3, 4. And then, I mean, you don't have to do everything by Xpresso, so here we go, although you could. So I just keyframed this. So say keyframe position down here, keyframe of Y position. Let's just hide that. And then I know the cycle is a 58-beat cycle, so I'll put another keyframe there. Actually, no, wrong one. Keyframe there. And then just as it's up at its peak here. So there's my F curve, and I want to create it kind of slamming down, so I'll just tweak it a bit. And then you can just loop or repeat any kind of keyframed value. You just highlight the value in here in the timeline, and then just put afterwards, repeat, and then put, say, repeat 100 times. So now, where are we? So that's just gonna loop forever. It's kind of might be worth knowing if you're doing music kind of bass stuff or stuff that requires a lot of accurate timing. You can highlight any value, say here, and your key time could be something like 58.1 or 0.08, and that doesn't make that much difference kind of usually, but if you just keep looping that cycle, it becomes quite a lot. So if you're looping something over a whole piece of music, it'll slide out, but you've got a kind of float value in your time. Undo that. So something else which is quite interesting, I think, is, and I use a lot, is if I highlight my keyframes here, I can, and this works in any field, I can do basic mathematical operations in these boxes here. So I could do, if I put in X, and that just take the current value, and then I do times, say, 3, and if you watch the curve, it's been multiplied by 3, so it's 3 times as high. It's amplified, bang, bang. So it's amplified the values, and that becomes very useful. If I got a little example here, so if I select all of these circles, then in the radius I could do X divided by 4. And so it just divides the radius of all of them by 4, or I could do something simple like X plus 100. Oh, actually, no, I can't do that. I don't want to do that. Say in the Y position, I could do X, say, plus 200, just to push them all up. And yeah, I just find I use it all the time. And if you get your head around it, it's just pluses, minuses, times. And this is a Yader tip. Most things are either kind of Yader or Tim Clapham at some point. You can also do more advanced things, so you can do random. So actually, I'll show you the num function. So what the num function does is it says, it looks just in your object browser, and if you type in num, it'll go, that's 0, 1, 2, 3. It'll just give you the number it is in order in the object browser. So I just do num times, say, 50, and it just put them in a line. I'll do, say, num, num times 300. I'll make it a bit clearer. So if we look at each one, it's done 0, and then 300, and then the next one will be 600. So that can be quite useful. And you can also do random functions if you're feeling sadistic. So that could be RND times num, times 4, and times 50 or something. And just in the help section, just look in formulas, and there's a whole set of universal formulas you can use in Cinema, and you can use those. But mainly I just use kind of pluses and minuses and basic stuff, and it really does help with workflow. It's genuinely useful. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to look at is just turn it down. It's just this little thing hidden behind the UI. There we go. So this little kind of EQ, little skirt thing. So I'm just going to show you how to build that, and that's just taking the kind of just the waveform or the EQ of a whole piece, and I'll just show you how that's made. So this shows you roughly, so I've got just a landscape object, and I've got a sound effector, and I'm just going to load my sound, put in some minimal techno, because we're in Holland. Or is that more German? I don't know. and I'm going to put it across, and I'm going to put it into step mode, and I'm just going to just put it up a bit. Actually, and what I need to do, I need to put it onto point mode. So now my effector, without using any MoGraph really, I don't know if it's technically MoGraph or not, so is affecting the geometry. And so you can apply that to kind of almost any object. I could put a delay effector and point node in there and start playing with that. So if I can actually stop it, there we go. So I'll just delete that. So do exactly the same thing with a spline. It's just a circle. And then I'm just going to grab my sound. So grab some minimal techno, pull it across again. And you've got this kind of logarithmic slider here. And that doesn't change anything of the output, but it just displays the audio in a slightly different way, which is sometimes easier to see. And then I'm just going to put it into step mode again. So that's pretty much, that's the basis of it. And then what we want to do is we just want to sweep that. Sweep node, and then I'm just going to use an N side. So I tend to use N sides a lot more than circles, because you can very much more explicitly control how many polygons you've got in your setup. So there we go. Actually, I want to make sure that's under the circle. So now we're just sweeping it, which is fairly straightforward. But also, I want the pulse of the music to affect how fat or how wide that N side is. So it's got a bit more audio responsiveness. So it's similar to what we did before. I want my N side. I want my radius. I want a sample node to sample the effector. And I want my effector. So I'm just going to plug it in. Object. And then, again, I'm just going to read the strength off. I'm going to plug it in. And you can probably see, you might not be able to see online that it's working, but it is. But we can just use a range mapper to make it more explicit. And so we can actually see what we're doing and control our results. So let me plug that in. So my incoming range is 0 to 1, and so my outcoming range, say, let's make that 5 to, say, 20. And you'll hear the music is as kind of tedious as a dance music track can be. It's just your bass and a hi-hat. And I did this because with the actual example, it had a more complex tune with echoes and filters. But I kind of just did a really simple version for the sound effector to use. And really, if you want to do good sound responsive stuff, you need to take the audio and kind of break it apart or have the actual layers. Otherwise, it'll just be a mess. His audio is surprisingly dirty, as it were. And then, like, for example, we could just change that maybe to 20 to 5 just to invert the relationship. So now, as it gets louder, it gets thinner. But let's not do that. OK, so I want to change the color as well. So I'm actually going to use a bit of MoGraph. Put it in a cloner object. I just want one cloner object. I'm going to make a duplicate of my sound effector. I'm going to turn off the position. And I'm just make sure color mode is on. I'm going to make sure the color mode is on to volume. And then I'm just going to drop that into the effector. So now I'm just using it to control the color. So that's kind of, you're starting to link things together. And as ever, it's just about being playful and linking stuff up and just kind of, then you could trace that, you could clone onto that, you could clone these, you could, that's, I guess, the thing about cinema. If you use it, you can keep playing, and that's where interesting things come up. Interesting relationships. So that's cool. So what we've also got, this is where it starts to get a little bit more advanced. We've got this kind of skirt thing, which goes around the bottom, and so that's a bunch of kind of splines attaching one circle to the other. So I'm just going to show you how I did that. And we're getting into a realm of iterators, and they're nodes in Xpresso, which are they're kind of like loops in programming, or they're very much more like MoGraph, so they're just dealing with lists of objects kind of thing. And I think that's a lot more what MoGraph is behind the scene. It's processing just lists of objects multiple times, which are your clones. But anyway, so let's have a look at how we do that. So spline joins. So I've just got a still circle. I've got my animated circle at the bottom, and I've just got a little simple line here. Let's just have a look. with 2 points. And I want to join the top point to the top spline, bottom point to the bottom spline, and I want to create a load that go around the edge. So if we just have a look, there's a little tab called the structure menu. Now, if you don't know this, any editable object will have just the points, and it will have just the position value of each point. And so if I change, I can just type in here, say change that to 50. Oh, I can try and type 50. I'll type 50, and it'll just move it. If I move it around, you'll see the value changes. I'll put it back. And then you always, with programming type stuff in Xpresso, you always start counting at 0. So it's 0.0 and 1. So there's the second point. You can move that around or whatever. Now, you can control this in Xpresso through something called the point node. So let's do that. Let's grab a point node. And then the point node will want to know what it's operating on. So you grab the line, and you just link it up to your point node. So now it's working. So your point node will go, OK, I'm using point index 0, or you could switch that to point index 1. And you can either output a position, or you can feed one in. So let's just feed one in. I'll open up my point position port. So this is going to control point 0. And then I can just, where are we? Hopefully just move that around via Xpresso. Right, so that's cool. But what we actually want to do is we want to link it to a point on this still circle. So it's just going to be a lot of repeating now. Let's just make this a bit bigger. So I'm going to grab my still circle. I'm going to grab another point node. I'm going to connect them up. So now I'm going to feed out the position to feed into this node. So point position, point 0 of a still circle, and I'm going to feed it into point position 0 of the line. So hopefully, let's have a look. OK, that's not visible yet. Let me just, sorry, I've done a mistake. Bear with me. So let's make this 200. So both points were over each other, but it's still working. So if I just move my still circle around now, and then you'll see the point is connected. So the point node is driving one position to point 0 of that line. And then you might guess where I'm going next. I'm just going to repeat again. So I'm going to grab my point node. I'm going to grab the animated circle, because I want to grab the point off the animated circle, plug the object in, and then I want to control point 1 now of my line, drop that in, and then I'm just going to drive it again. Drive. So now both points are connected. So that's more or less it. It's not quite working yet. I just want to make sure I tick use deformed points so it does the calculation. So now I've got one line, one simple spline joined up to 2 moving points. And I'll just turn that off. This exact setup's really useful for a lot of UI things, for creating kind of webs of connected things, and you can use it with curved Beziers and things. And it's kind of, you're getting into the area of a trace object, but just a much more succinct way of doing it. And as well, if you're looking at this kind of going, that's really counterintuitive and weird, and I kind of don't like it, I just want to stay up there. It's strange to begin with, but you will get used to it. And it really will start to make sense and become just a playful, normal way to kind of work. So that's fine, and we've got one line. And then we actually want to do, say, 64 lines kind of thing. And that, we don't want to duplicate this whole setup 64 times. We can use the iterator nodes, or the hierarchy nodes, or the link list, or the object list, and they're all much the same thing. They just take a bunch of objects and output them. So I'm going to show you that. So copy and paste. I'm going to grab my cloner. Where are we? And then I am just going to clone it 64 times. So I've got 64 lines. So there's my 64 lines. I'm just going to make that editable. And then, because I like being neat, you should always try and be neat, especially if someone else is going to use your project. And for yourself, be neat, honestly. It benefits everyone. It's for the global good. So now I've got 64 lines. And I'm just going to use, I could use a number of the nodes I've just suggested. So if you have a look in Xpresso, these are the iterators. So I'm just going to use an object list. So as expected, it's just a list. So you just put your objects in there. I'm going to lock it to the UI. I'm going to select everything under there, just using middle click. And then I'm going to drag all my lines into there. Now, already that node, every frame, that's outputting all 64 of those lines. It's already doing that. It doesn't look like it's doing a lot because you're not doing anything with them, but it is doing it. So instead of using this line, let's use all of the lines. So let's just plug in my instance there. So now, all of the lines, let's have a look. All of the lines are going to point 0 of the circle. So it's working, thankfully. And then I'm going to just link it into the bottom node. I've made my UI too small. If I zoom up. And then I'm going to link them in to the object. So now, so that isn't working. So let's try again. So now all of my lines are in exactly the same position. They're all linking between point 0 there and point 0 there, which is, we're getting to where we want, but not quite. Now, where these kind of object lists can start to get really powerful is just in something called object index. So let's just drop that down. I'm going to plug my object list into it. And to see what it's doing, I'm just going to use a node, which is really useful for seeing what you're doing. I'm just going to put the index in print to console. And then I'm going to go to script, and then I'm going to get my console up. I'm just going to clear my console. And then I'm going to go forward one frame. And that prints out everything that's coming out of a node. It's a little bit hidden away, but it's very useful. Like in Xpresso, you will want to debug things. It's sometimes hard to see what's going on. So using print to console, using your result node, using your spy nodes, just to see what's going on. Because often it is working, but the scale's far too small, or just something odd's happening. But so what this is doing is just printing out a list of numbers. And it doesn't seem that useful, but that's where the real power of the setup comes from. That's where it all feeds from. So that index, I'm just going to feed that into the point index of both of the circles, so just the first one. And now it's going around. It's going spline 1. I'm going to link to point 1, because it's all part of the same network. It's all just a loop. It's all a self-contained loop. So you can, and then I just need to do the same thing again. And hopefully, I put it into point index. Where are we? So now it's all linked up. So that's doing something that, I mean, you almost certainly could do it in MoGraph in a certain way. You could probably put tracers round, and I don't know. Actually, I don't know, use the line somehow. But this is a really powerful way of working. Once you start to understand the iterators and what they do, you can start to kind of glom onto your MoGraph stuff, and you can do more kind of custom tweak things that you wouldn't normally be able to do. And you might not use it a lot, but for certain problems, you have to use it. So that's kind of a brief introduction. So I'm going to show you another project. So this is an introduction I did. Where are we? Sorry.
Names in pop music.
From a #1 album to a sold-out tour.
#1.
So what you've got here is
takes the music industry.
the audio is driving a kind of a similar circular kind of EQ, and then it's got a series of concentric rings going outwards, and they're kind of all offset. The time offset counts down as we go further out, so it creates a kind of image of a kind of ripple going outwards, but it's really just a series of rings counting down. I didn't actually do this in Cinema. I did it in Houdini, because Houdini's got a really, really nice kind of audio tool set. But I did bring it into Cinema to render using X particles and Paul Everett's point cloud plugin. We actually went into the forest, scanned these forests, and rendered in X particles. And usually Cinema might struggle with a 23 million point cloud, but just using the plugin is absolutely fine. So I got asked if I could do something similar to that, as is often the way with work. You make one thing, and then people want it again. But if I could do something similar in Cinema, and I kind of scratched my head for a bit, and eventually kind of thought of a way, but actually too late for the job. But I'm going to show you how I did it. So I've got a circle, again, with a circle that we're friends with, and then I'm just going to make an Alembic out of that. So if you don't use Alembic, you probably should be, because it's just a format you can export out of Cinema and bring in, and you can put huge amounts of geometry into it, and then bring it back into Cinema, and it'll play back really fast. It's like pre-rendering something or something like that, but it's so useful. So let's go to Alembic ring G, And then I'll just check my options. I think that's right. I'm going to merge generated, just make sure I've got curves turned on, export it, delete all this, and then, where are we? Bring back my Alembic ring. Which one is it? Yesterday, today. Where is it? OK. Well, I'm just going to grab any one of them. I think it should be OK. OK, so there's my EQ ring. So I can create loads of these, and it's still play back fast. So basically, what I want to do, I want to get a bunch of these rings, and then I'm just going to use the start of animation offset. So so the ones in the middle play first, and then as you go out further, they play later and later. So I'm going to show you how I did that. And you would think maybe you could do it, put two of them in a cloner, adjust the start of animation, put it in blend mode. But unfortunately, it doesn't work. I don't know why, but it doesn't. It would be nice if it did. OK, so I'm just going to clone these again. So let's say make 31 of them, or whatever number you want. And then make it editable. And then let us put an Xpresso tag on here. And then, so this time I'm going to use a hierarchy node. It's a lot like the object list node I used before, but it's a little bit more sophisticated and a little bit more scary. But it's actually fine if you know how to use it. But it's one of those ones, it took me a really long time to kind of get my head around. But so there's my hierarchy node, and it's already got the null in it. And basically what it's going to do is it's going to read everything under that null. That's what this little path does down here. And you can set up quite sophisticated relationships with it, so it could read every child of every third one or whatever, but we don't need to do that. Let's just use that. And then we want to grab our animated circle, and we want to just make sure we grab the start of animation offset. OK, and also we're going to grab the scale as well. If I can grab that. OK. So we want our object index as well. Object index. So now I'm pumping out all of the objects, and I'm going to pump them all into this object here. So let's go to object. And I'm also going to pump the index just into the scale. So now that's just going to spread them all out. So the first set of circles will be scale 0, second one, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so they're just going to scale up. And then if I press play, if I play, right, I think something's gone slightly wrong. Let's have a look. So my start of animations was 62. I'm just going to make it 0, so it actually does something. And so they've all got the same start time. It's kind of giving us kind of what we want, and the frames per second is still pretty good, even though there's 30 objects in, each with 64 points. It's not a lot, actually, but it's a start. It's OK. It's still going quite fast. So now if we just put in index into the start of time, press play again. So each one's got a different start time. You'll be surprised to know it is working. But it's not going out fast enough. The inner ones are starting fast enough, but they're not getting to the outside fast enough. So we can just put a math node in. And so what it's actually doing is it's outputting in the start of animations looking for seconds, and we really want it in frames. We want it to step up once every frame. So let's just divide it by 30, because we're at 30 frames a second. Let's put our index in and put it to start of animation, and then divide it by 30. So now we're getting what we want. So it's starting in the middle and is emanating outwards. And that's pretty cool. And it's kind of creating this sound wave look. What's really nice about the hierarchy node, which you don't get in the other nodes, is it'll automatically read what's underneath it. So what I can do is let's just duplicate this up, and then duplicate it again. So we've got, how many nodes have we got? So we've got 90. We've got 93 now. Hit play, and it's still running. It's still fine. We're going at 45 frames a second. That's the nice thing about Alembic, is it can kind of move your geometry around. We're still in real time, and that's quite a few points. It's quite a nice way of working. And so there we go. So something else which is a nice way to control this. So we know we've got, so how many was it? Say 93 points. So we can use the range mapper again. And let's drop that in between. And let's drop it into scale. So we know our input is going to be from 0 to, say, 93, I think it was. And then now we want our output maybe to be 100. So we're kind of back where we were. Let's go there. So now we don't just have to use this linear relationship. We can use a spline relationship. So now I can kind of create a curve, create something a little bit more dynamic on how it moves. So now we're kind of a bit more spread out in the middle. Or we could create like an S-bend like that. And kind of it's going to speed up and then kind of slow down as it hits the outside just because of how they're placed. And it's kind of creating that movement. And that would be, I don't know how you'd do that in MoGraph just by itself. And this is what you get from kind of going under the hood a little bit more. So what you can do, also another way you can kind of automate things, let's get rid of some of these splines. And so now it's not, now my spline, my range map is a little bit messed up because my inputs and outputs are wrong, but I can automate that as well. So my input upper, so now I've got 57 elements, so the range map is not quite right, but this has just got a count on it, and then if I can put that into my input upper, then it'll automatically adjust no matter how many splines I've got under there. The system will always react, so you can start to create tools. And quite often when you kind of open up something someone's made out of Xpresso, it have a billion lines and connections and look horribly confused. But often that's just someone creating kind of a nice, easy user interface. Quite often there's just quite a simple-ish idea kind of just hidden under the surface. That is roughly where my actual presentation ends, or should end. But I've still got... Is anyone from Maxon here listening? Do they? I don't know. I might carry on a little bit with some other things. So this is kind of going off script a little bit. So let's have a look. So something else that you sometimes want to do in Xpresso or with music animation is so instead of just something reacting to the beat and going up and down kind of like that, you want it to each time to kind of move a step on. So you want cumulative behavior. So let's have a look. So that's kind of what we've got. That's just reacting to the bass. Reacting to the bass, man. And that's just our Xpresso as we'd expect to find it. So we've just got our sound object going into the sample, going into the range mapper, going into position. But what we actually want to do is we want to take the previous position where it was in the last frame and add that to the new kind of input coming in. It's kind of like a loop. You're just adding on each time. You want to store the information somehow, and it's quite simple to do. So I'm just going to grab my sphere in, and what are we using? We are driving our Y position, so I'm just going to grab the Y position again, and creating another instance of my sphere. Then I'm just going to get add, and then I'm just going to add its current position. Where are we? To its new position, so I'm just adding the two. And hopefully, if we have a look, where are we? So it's just moving up now, so it's just adding onto the previous position. If I stop it, it's not going to return to 0. That's one of the strange things about Xpresso, or different things. It starts to get a little bit, you're going a bit deeper, so it can start to do some slightly odd things. So again, push, 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 push. And that's kind of how you can create kind of just rotational relationships as well. So I've just got a platonic here. And literally, I've got its B rotation, and then it's adding 1 or 0.02 each time, and then putting it back out to its B rotation. So every frame, it's going to add that together. So that's just going to create a rotation. It's just moving by that increment. So that's kind of, it's almost the very basis of kind of animation. And it's a little bit odd to begin with, but you can do some interesting things. OK, so this is another little setup that hopefully I've got time to show. So what I've got is I've just got some nulls in a cloner. I've just got a random effector on noise mode rather than random mode. It's on a slowish speed. And this is where I quite often just use to move things around noise and turbulence, or you could use a shader effector. And a shade effect is interesting because you could, if you put in like a cell noise, you could create very kind of well, you can do loads more, I won't go into that. But then I'm going to put it into a tracer object. So now I'm creating some nice spliny curves. And then sometimes it's come up that you want to orientate your clones. So literally, I've just cloned on to my tracer object, and it naturally aligns the clone. That's with it turned off. And then I've just pushed the offset right to the end. So that kind of creates a nice little swarmy thing with aligned clones. Where are we? Offset. I want it just about there. But I can then start to use kind of what we know about iterators to kind of access the information in these clones. So if I just create a Xpresso tag, and then where are we? Iterators. So I want to go back to motion graphics, and then a data node will just read everything about a cloner. So again, I just want to grab my cloner, put it into the object. So now it's reading out the count, the local matrix, but I want the position. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a tracer. I'm going to make a basic tracer object. And then, so if I just grab a Mo spline, and I make it have, I think there's 27 clones, so 26 points, make it editable. I'm going to drop that in. I'm going to use my point node. Again, if I can find it. And then I'm just going to link it to my editable Mo spline. And then I'm going to link the position through here. So that's not quite working yet. I'll just get rid of the, let's get rid of that, turn that on, turn that off. So it's not quite doing what we want yet, but we want to use an iterator. And so this is just going to count through each clone. So this node here wants to know which clone it's operating on. Currently, it's just operating on 0, but we want to go from 0 to 26 because there's 26 clones. Plug that in there to index, and we want to plug that into the point index of a point node. And then it doesn't work, so we've done something wrong. So 0 to 26, index, object position, point position, Mo spline object. I don't know why it's not working. Something's gone wrong. But it's linking up on the first one here. Oh, well. It's kind of roughly doing what we want. Anyway, as you can see, things can get a bit buggy and weird. I've kind of run out of time, I think, so I'm going to wrap it up there, where it's gone a bit weird. And I am just going to say thank you very much. Go to my website, especially if you want some music visualization done and stuff. And thanks to Maxon and everyone. Thanks so much. Cheers.